right, so I gotta have this conversation because it's all over my timeline and there's a lot of fear sewed into the discussion that I want us to kind of bring us down to earth without like shoo-shooing it away. Today we're gonna talk about microplastics as the title suggests, and are they actually harmful? I think those are two separate questions, right? In fact, I'm gonna go reach out to one of my like science folks. Like there's gotta be, I'm pretty sure someone who like specializes in that type of stuff, who probably give me a little bit better insight as well too. So there may be a part 2 of this discussion on microplastics, but I do want to get my thoughts out there because I'm seeing it scroll across my timeline, getting sent to me in text messages that I want to make sure I don't ignore it, right? We're not going to ignore it, right? We're going to recognize like, hey, people are talking about it, so they kind of want to hear, you know, one of your favorite health content creators got to say about the topic. So let's talk about what microplastics are. Where can you find them? If they are harmful to us, like how would that process even start, right? And what do we know? For those who may be looking for a more scientific laden discussion, this ain't it, y'all. If you are a part of the Lunch and Learn community, you want to get some hard, cold facts, you want to know some information, and then you want to be able to take it and run with it and go find some more deeper information if you need be, right? But like I said, when I do a part 2, I may get one of my experts and I may deep dive down with one of my experts and let them tell me what's going on. But at least for this discussion, we're just going to say like, all right, what's going on here? You may have seen it. There's plenty of news clips around of people talking about the harm of plastics in the body. And you're trying to figure out, whoa, what are they talking about when they say microplastics, right? Like I go to Publix, I go to Target, I get plastics every day. Like, what does that mean? So microplastics from a definition perspective is a tiny particle less than 5 millimeters. Tiny particles that are less than 5 millimeters that are available or found in the ocean, in the soil, in the air we breathe. This is where I might lose some people. The foods we eat, it's been found in our feces, right? So it's been found in organ tissue, right? After, you know, just autopsies for something, not specifically for the plastic, but it's been found in organ tissue that you could possibly avoid. They're kind of everywhere. And you can kind of figure out or think about how they would get into like some of these other environmental things like plastic, like ocean, soil, and food. You can kind of figure that out, right? Because we don't take care of the earth, right? I'm not a geologist right now, right? I'm not going to like turn Captain Planet on you guys, right? And that's a reference for those who are old enough to catch the reference. If you know who Captain Planet is, drop it in the comments. If you don't, go do some Googling or whatever search thing you use to figure out who Captain Planet was and how that was one of the most amazing cartoons growing up, right? At least for me. So you have particles that are less than 5 millimeters found in lots of various places. And you're seeing this rise of a discussion that it's gonna be harmful or it can be harmful if it's in us. Right? But we already know it's in us because it's been found in our soil, it's been found in our organ tissue, and you may be trying to figure out like, man, what can I avoid this? First of all, the answer is no, right? And I hate to say it, all right? I wanted to get that out there early. I didn't want the cliffhanger, people thinking that there's somehow, some way they're going to somehow avoid an exposure to microplastics. First of all, it's less than 5 millimeters. It's found in the air and water. How would you do that, right? It's found in certain foods. How would you do that? I wanted to make sure I got that cliffhanger out the way so we can have some discussions on like the dangers or perceived dangers, right? Let's stress that because they are perceived right now. There are no overt human related known issues that are due specifically to microplastics that we say, oh man, this person had a toxicity of microplastics in their system, and because of that, they developed this. That's not here yet, right? And I want to say yet, it is what? We're in the month of January 2025, just in case you watch this, 2 years, 5 years down the line, and then more information comes out. Because guess what? That happens. Guess what? I'll be doing another episode, and this episode will be too. Oh, so there aren't any human-related issues that we see at this time. Most of the discussion associated with microplastics are what they see in the lab that they extrapolate would happen if it happened to us in like that severe degree. So think about this. That's how a lot of these experiments and stuff work anyway. They start in the lab. They may get a couple of animals and they extrapolate what it may look like in humans. Like, we're not at that point where we're seeing humans die from microplastic exposure toxicity. We're not there yet. right? Hopefully we're never there, but I just want to say we're not there yet. Just so when you see like, oh my God, the dangers of microplastics, you understand that they're extrapolating those dangers based off results they found in the lab, right? And they're trying to extrapolate and say, hey, if it does this in the lab, I can only imagine what it's doing to your body right now. And maybe it can possibly explain an association with microplastics. Like that's kind of how the discussion's kind of happening right now. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about some of our pathways of exposure. Because I think we understand some of the pathways of exposure. We'll understand, what things that we can do to maybe lessen our exposure. Unless you're going to live in a bubble, unless you're going to be like the bubble boy in Seinfeld, you're likely going to be exposed to something. But let's talk about some of the pathways to exposure of these microplastics. How can we get exposed to these microplastics? I kind of alluded to this in the intro. They're damn near everywhere, y'all. Like, Let's be real. So in the air, they are in air particles, dust particles. Remember, they're less than 5 millimeters. Air particles, dust particles. There have been studies that have shown multiple different sites and parts of the world where they test the air and they see, you know what? I see a concentration of these air particles, right? So in the air, like it's there. There's been studies that they've done on multiple options of drinking waters. And guess what? Microplastics were there as well. And I stress drinking waters, right? I want to make sure I stress that. Drinking waters, because that means people are drinking. This one, I love this fact. A study conducted in 2020 found that about 83% of global tap water samples contain some form of microplastic. Some form of contaminated tap water contains some microplastics, right? And I hate that it's called contamination, but I mean, it is what it is. Bottled waters aren't specific, because my bottled water people are like, oh, I'm just going to get some bottled water. Nope. I don't care about your Evian or your Zephyr Hills. You run the risk over there as well too. Drinking water, whether it's bottled or, I'm just reading, whether it's bottled or traditional, is a significant contributor to the human microplastic ingestion. So just drinking water, y'all. What are we going to do? We're not going to stop drinking water. We're not going to stop drinking water. We're not going to stop cooking with the need of water, right? Like, it is what it is. I don't want y'all thinking that y'all are going to live this life where you avoid microplastics at all costs. Because one, you don't need to right now, right? That's what I'm stressing. You don't need to do it right now, but it's something to think about. Food, right? And I mentioned food. Food consumption is another way that we get these microplastics in our system. And guess what, right? You may be thinking like, all right, man, what type of foods is the big problem? Let's think about it, right? We kind of mentioned it. The ocean has a lot of microplastics. A lot of people are dumping a lot of things in them waters, and a lot of things are, not biodegradable, right? And guess what? They're being eaten by a lot of these marine life, shellfish and whatnot. And guess what we do? We eat, right, the marine life in tiny pieces, right? And then it moves up the ladder, right? So there are multiple ways for microplastics to get inside of us. Ways that you're likely just not going to avoid. You're just not going to avoid them. So I don't want you to try. You're really just wasting your time, right? For the most part, especially, right? And remember, I stress this, especially because the human issues associated with microplastics and have not been shown to be in humans. It's just what we, from a lab perspective, are extrapolating that can move up the case, right? So I'm going to talk about some of the perceived risk factors associated with an abundance of these microplastics, right? Like if, again, for some reason, you're like, I'm going to be on a microplastic diet. Like, these are some of the health risk factors that you're going to have to deal with. Don't be on a microplastic diet, maybe. Like, if I can give you any advice today, don't be on a microplastic diet. Maybe that'll, y'all won't make me a liar when I say, like, oh, yeah, we're not dealing with people who have toxic levels of microplastic in the system. Like, let's not do that, right? If we can. Let's talk about some of the health risks associated with microplastics. Okay, so as we talk about these health risks, remember that we don't have a lot of information to go off. So a lot of this is more hypothesis related, like more like, hey, this is what we think would happen, like if a person had dangerous levels of microplastics. So this is the first one. Microplastics have a presence in the GI tract and respiratory tract, right? Like, because they, again, I mentioned they've been found in different parts of organ tissues. So theoretically, you can have issues if they're found in abundance in the GI tract and respiratory tract, where you can have respiratory problems, GI-related issues, blockages. So there's some things that can occur that is small enough that it can cross the barrier of, being in the stomach and not being digested in the stomach and then seeping out and then going elsewhere. So it is small enough where it can do that, theoretically, right? So it is a thing that we have to kind of keep in mind of, right? So there are some risk factors that are possible, right? And I want to stress this, possible risk factors, again, GI, respiratory, because that's where we're finding some of the tissue diagnosis of these microplastics. They can be a vector, right? So this article kind of mentions that microplastics can serve as vectors for harmful chemicals and pathogens, right? So they can almost be like a pass-through, like a carrier of some of these harmful chemicals and whatnot. Again, if seen in abundance of an amount, yeah, it could be a problem. Right? Really, really can be a problem. So understand that, yes, it is theoretically not benign, right? Theoretically, you can have these, organ-related issues. You can have these systemic-related issues from a chemical perspective. The immune response. If you get enough of it, your body can react like, hey, there's a foreign body in my system, attack. And we understand that the body does a great job recognizing things that are not supposed to be there, but it can cause some problems if you allow. So we got to be careful in that sense. Definitely have to be careful in that sense when thinking about trying to avoid it. So how can we reduce our exposure to these microplastics, right? Like, how can I get rid of it? Like, how can I avoid it, right? And I kind of mentioned, right? Like, if we just think back, like how we could possibly get it, you try to avoid plastic products. We try to reduce our consumption as a whole in these plastic products. Again, you're not going to avoid water. The water is there. So even for my vegan folks who avoid animal products, you're drinking water, right? It's going to be there for you. But maybe if we filter it enough, right? Maybe if we get better filters, right, that can catch some of these microplastics. But again, they're not all, right, encompassing. If you're a seafood lover, right, understand, right, that you may not want to eat too much because the risk is there, right? So my seafood lovers, be careful. We're just extrapolating down the road. That's all I'm doing. I'm extrapolating down the road. There's not too many things, right? And you see this part is kind of short. There's not too many things you can do to avoid these microplastics. But understand that we are going to keep, again, in the healthcare field, we're going to keep an eye on it. We're going to make sure that it doesn't become the problem that it possibly can be, because, I don't want to have to deal with microplastics either, right? Like, I don't want to have to deal with all of the ill effects that it can happen when it's in my body as well. So I'm here with you guys. I just want to get you guys off the ledge of fear of these microplastics. We're not at that point yet. Despite what all of these news and articles may try to act like it is, we're not at that point yet. But always be concerned that if it is there, we'll let you know about it, at least here on the Lunch and Learn community, right? So I'm yours truly, Dr. Barry Pierre. I'm gonna see you guys next week.